everybody, and good morning. Welcome to our inaugural segment here of Tech Beat for 2023. We're so happy to have you with us here this morning. Today, I have my esteemed guest, Francis Pedraza, with me. I will come back and introduce Francis in a couple of minutes here. Before we do that, however, I did just want to give a few announcements and take care of a couple of items. My name is Earl Foote, by the way. I am founder CEO of Nexus IT. We are a 24-year-old outsourced IT support and cybersecurity services firm based here in northern Utah and servicing a nationwide footprint. You are joining us here on TechBeat, where leaders learn, innovate, and grow. This podcast is now on all major podcast platforms. So go subscribe wherever you like to listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Google, whatever makes sense for you. We would appreciate your support. Let's see, throughout the hour here, Francis and I will do our best to keep an eye on the chat from whatever platform you're joining us from. We will, try to get to questions during the hour or at the end of the hour, so feel free to interact with us. I want to thank Mallory Lovestad, our Director of Marketing, who's helped get everything set up here and is in studio with me here today. Also, we have our first half of 2023, the calendar for TechBeat set up. So I want to announce who we've got coming up. We've got some really, really awesome guests coming up over the next 6 months that I think you're all going to thoroughly enjoy. I know that I will, and I'm going to learn a whole lot from these wonderful people. So later this month on the 24th, Nate Randall, the CEO of Gab Wireless, will be joining me here on TechBeat. On February 9th, Tara Spalding, the CEO of VentureCapital.org, will be joining me. On February 21st, Trina Limpert, CEO of Rise Next. On March 7th, Tim Cooley, management consultant with Point B and author of the Pitch Deck book. Also in March, Jason Klug, CEO of Klugonics. In March, Dustin Kenyon and Rob Polecki, co-founders of Washi, will be joining me. Romain Marshall in April. Romain is one of the country's leading cyber and privacy attorneys, and he's at Pulcinelli. My friend Jeff Erickson, who's over strategic partnerships at Forecaster and an angel investor, will be joining me in May. And in June, we have Monty Deer, the CEO of Kizix, a really cool local consumer brand shoes here from Utah. So keep an eye out for further announcements on those segments that are coming up, and join us on those live podcasts. So let me get to my guest of the hour here. I'm going to bring Francis Pedraza up on the screen with me and introduce him to you. 8 years ago, Francis started an operations company because he wanted to make it seamless, easy, and elegant for bold thinkers to start high-performing companies. Today, that company, Invisible, employs more than 1,000 people and uses tech in novel ways to help fast-growing companies scale their dreams. People who've worked with Francis say his strategy comes from clear, deep thinking, and that he excels at building models, communicating vision, and motivating his team. Most importantly, he's refreshingly honest about success, failures, and his learnings along the way. Backed by I'm struggling to pronounce this morning. Backed by Graycroft and employee-owned, Invisible's story has been featured in The New Yorker and ARK Invest FYI podcast. Francis, my friend, good morning. Welcome. I realize it's afternoon. You're over there on the East Coast in New York. I'll be there next week, by the way. But
it'd be great to see you.
Yeah, so great to see you. So happy to have you here with me on TechBeat. Excited to have a conversation here with you about your entrepreneurial journey and this extraordinary journey that you've been on to build Invisible from the ground up over 7 years, from 0 to 1,000 employees, which is a pretty that's a pretty significant feat. So let's maybe just, get into the conversation first, talking about the guy behind all this, right? Tell us a little bit about Francis Pedraza. Who are you? Where did you grow up? How did you ultimately end up in entrepreneurship? And what, led you to be, to found and become CEO of Invisible?
Thanks, Earl. And thanks to the audience. This is live. I can mess up in public right now.
I messed up plenty of times in the intro, so
This
go
is
for it,
so
man.
great. This is so great. So people are going to chat us and I'm going to just see it. Wow, that's so cool.
Yep.
I think this is really exciting. This is a great way to start off 2023. Is this the inaugural podcast of the year?
This is the inaugural podcast. Welcome. Yes.
Wow.
Thank you for
We're either going to get the year off to an amazing start, or I don't know. You have to wait till your next one to get the year off to an amazing start. Thank you so much. Is it Mallory in studio with you? Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Mallory.
Thanks, Mallory. Hi.
Yeah.
This is going to be a great session. I appreciate the warm intro. It's an honor to be here. And I can tell how recently our marketing team sent that to you based on the head count, because actually I'm pleased to report we are over 1,500 people.
Wow,
and so that means that we probably sent that to you sometime after Labor Day when we crossed 1,000, and sometime before the last 45 days.
I think we're talking 6 months ago or something like that when we put this together. So yeah,
that sounds about right.
Yeah,
we are growing very quickly, and so it's kind of interesting. I mean, if there's any entrepreneurs out there who are wandering through the wilderness, because that's what it feels like. And I think any entrepreneur who's been an entrepreneur long enough, when it just hasn't been a fairy tale, because I suppose the fairy tale is kind of like the movie The Social Network, although that's pretty dramatic, that story. But you're at Harvard, you're a student, you drop out, and then before you know it, blink, you raise money. Before you know it, blink, it's scaling. Before you know it, blink, you're IPOing for $100 billion, and it's just like one up and to the right story, at least from the outside world's point of view. I think actually building that company was probably super intense, but it's as close to a kind of fairy tale, where it's just the age of the founder, the velocity, like the verticality of it is just very unusual. My story couldn't be more different. Right out of college, I started my first company. It was Everest. It was an iPhone app to help people achieve their personal goals, empower them to live their full potential. It was like Instagram for your goals, with a bunch of to-do list type features and community features. And we had 500,000 people download it, won a bunch of design awards, and then it failed. Big fat zero financially. Took more than 3 years out of my life and a lot of life force, as you know. It takes a lot of energy to do it. Learned a lot. Had a bunch of job offers from tech companies. Turned down the job offers. Didn't know what I wanted to do though. So I punted with a community called Cheeky, where I asked all my friends to share startup ideas. They did not have time to start. And I would publish an idea a day. So for a year, we brainstormed hundreds of ideas. And then that got me thinking, I'm like, hang on, we've looked at all these different industries, all these different technologies. There's an app for everything these days. How come everything isn't perfect yet? There's an app for everything. How come everything isn't perfect yet? That's an interesting question. And I started to focus on that question. And I came to the realization that, okay, Uber drives cars for you. What drives apps for you? We're mass producing all these tools, but people have a limited amount of hours in a day. How are they going to actually use the tools? So that was where the original thesis, which was a cheeky thesis called Invisible Technologies, was written. It wasn't a company yet. It was just a thesis. It was just an insight. And then I realized, hang on, what if we became that company? And I realized, there's a reason why technology investors tend to invest only in products, not in services, because they want pure software. Software as a service is a high margin, highly scalable business model, very predictable in a number of its characteristics. So it's easy for you to build repeatable playbooks. If you're Y Combinator, which is like a company factory, just producing companies, you like playbooks and repeatability. That's why you have safe notes. So you don't have to renegotiate every time. And you want like SaaS companies, because it's just like every company is the same. And as soon as you're deviating from that, suddenly it's difficult to underwrite the risk and the opportunity. And it just sort of seems increasingly unlikely that it works. And I started to realize this is pretty paradoxical, which is one of my key words, paradox. Paradox is anything that like there's two opposing truths, and the whole truth has to encompass the tension of those truths. So it is true that SaaS companies have a bunch of advantages. It is also true that if you listen to any of the what I would call the startup gospel, if whether you read 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, or you read the Lean Startup, or you read any of these like manuals, Innovator's Dilemma, or Steve Blank wrote a bunch of books, any of these like popular tech books, like how do you become the next Mark Zuckerberg, right? They'll say, don't try to become the next Mark Zuckerberg. Innovate, question assumptions, be a contrarian. And, there's that famous like Apple video about here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the square pegs and the round holes. And I watch that stuff and I'm like, I don't know. I drunk the Kool-Aid. Like, preach. Yes, that's me. I'm the misfit. I'm the rebel. I'm the contrarian. I'm going to question assumptions. And so I started questioning assumptions. Why should we build a software only solution? Why should we build a product? Why not a service? Do you know how big the services industry is? It's like a multi-trillion-dollar industry. It's an enormous industry, and venture capital generally avoids it, right? Yep. Because it involves humans in the loop, involves custom work. And the question is, how can you scale it? It tends to be very horizontal. So it's not just like one vertical, it tends to branch in all these different directions.
Longer sales cycles, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. The question is, what is the same quality of revenue? Is very transactional. Can you have high quality recurring revenue? There's a whole bunch of characteristics to make them avoid it. And from a technology point of view, when you have a complex problem that can go in all these different directions, it's hard to put a box around it. Well, I kind of was like, hang on, a process is a process is a process is a process. If you could build a black box that could perfectly execute any process, what are the limits of a process? What would be the limits of that black box? And so that is the company we built, Invisible Technologies. And the way it works is, from the client's point of view, you jump on a Zoom call with our team. You go to invisible.co, jump on a Zoom call with our team, and show us your company's processes. If you haven't mapped them yet, we'll help you map them. And we'll take your process from you, and we'll break it into little steps like Legos. We're going to automate those steps if we can. We have 200 different software tools that we've integrated with our digital assembly line and our process builder software. We have an automation team that will do all the steps that those software tools can't do. And then there are going to be some steps that we can't automate fully. And those steps, we build a UI wizard and we set it up so that we can run it on our assembly line. And we've got 1,500 workers in 60 countries around the world now that can do work in over 20 languages. And we measure them based on speed, quality, complexity, and we are able to deliver the work back to you at the most efficient unit price. And our whole mantra is better, faster, cheaper. Better, faster, cheaper. We're industrializing knowledge work through these processes. And so again, from the client's point of view, it's very, very simple. You delegate processes, you delegate work. There's a black box. You don't necessarily need to understand how it works. And then popped out the other side is a unit of work. Now, what are some examples of this? Well, this is where it gets interesting. It can be done. So many different things can be done with it. For example, food delivery companies like DoorDash, for example, we digitize restaurant menus and do things like that so that when you open up the app, all that data is correct. Because have you ever looked at the menu of like your local, I don't know, Korean restaurant? It's, in a different format than Sweetgreen menu, right? It's just a different format than another menu. And so you got to imagine the number of restaurants in the United States. How about the number of restaurants in the world? There's all these, it's not something that you can build a pure software solution around, but it's paradoxical. It's not something that software can't help you solve.
Right.
If you plug in enough tools and you build an operational process around it, you can run it, you can deliver it. So we can take that same approach. We also process insurance claims and do underwriting checks for insurance companies. We help hedge funds automate trading, and we help data science teams build and tag data sets. And we even help build machine learning companies, machine learning models. And sometimes that includes things like adversarial training. Just think about all these AI startups that are out there. There's a lot of work that goes into those models. That's not just software in the algorithm. It's the actual training of the model. If you're a real estate company and you need to find homes to buy and you need to search the internet based on a set of criteria, there's not one piece of software that can do that. That's a whole bunch of different pieces of software. We can do that for you. So have you ever seen a process flow chart, Earl?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, we build plenty of them internally, right?
Great. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So imagine all you have to do now is just give us the process flow chart and we'll run it for you, the whole thing. Now, the great thing is that you don't even need to build a process flow chart. We'll build it for you. So that's the company. That's what we do. And it is, and I just want to say this as a word of encouragement to any entrepreneurs out there. We were at a 1 mil run rate. So that means that we had $83,000 a month of revenue. Times 12 is $1 million a year of revenue at the top line. We were at a 1 mil run rate in January 2020. At the end of last year, we were at a 25 mil run rate. That's December 2022. It was something like this: 1 mil in January 2020 to 3 mil in the end of that year, to then 10 mil at the end of the next year, to then 25 mil at the end of the next year.
Super impressive.
This year is looking to maybe trounce all of them, right? Like we're growing at an even faster rate, which is crazy because we're bigger. In percentage terms, our growth rate should slow down, but it might actually be bigger than the last three. I say this not to brag, actually. I'll do like the anti-brag here, which is that, as you mentioned at the start of the podcast, we're now in our 8th year as a company. We finished the end of our 7th year on October 1st. We started in October 1st, 2015. Those first 6 months, we tried a business model. It didn't work. We ran out of all of our angel capital. There were 5 other people who refused to quit, and we just kept going. For over a year, we worked with only one client. We were paying ourselves less than $1,000 a month. We were broke, and we were working on this one client. And
the founder life, right?
No idea if it would work. We relaunched. It was growing quickly, but it was negative gross margins. We raised more money. We figured out a way to like make it profitable, gross margin profitable, to make it actually profitable. But like we raised some more money, and we were hoping that we could scale to get to a Series A. And at some point I realized, actually, like if we go the normal route, we're gonna fail, and we need to commit the company to profitability. So I did that actually in January 2020. By July 2021, we were profitable. And then we decided not to IPO the company, not to sell the company, not to raise a Series A, but to buy back our investors. And we had raised $7.5 million at this point. And I did my first ever structured capital deal. At the time, there was debt available, not preferred equity. And I didn't really understand debt, so I had to educate myself. And so far, we've returned $15 million to investors. And in the first year, we bought back 13.5% of the company. And last year, we bought back 10% of the company. This year, we're set up to buy more, call it another 15% of the company. And we've actually, at this point, all of our investors have sold, or institutional investors have sold or agreed to sell over the course of the coming years. And we are now a sovereign company. So that means that we are owned by the people at the company, by an organization we call the partnership. So when you join Invisible, you're not an employee. That's sort of we frown on that word. Sure. You're a partner. It's a totally different mindset. It's a totally different sort of social contract. Yeah. And we do have advisors that are also investors that are outside the company, but they're also partners. And the company has a call option to buy any partner stock under certain conditions. For example, if you're fired or you leave after a certain period of time, there's a max hold period, and then we have a call option to buy you at the most recent price. We're doing an internal IPO. So every year we do a tender offer, and the company is contractually committed to buy back 2% of its stock every year. So we are recycling shares and giving people liquidity. And we're running on internal power. We're just scaling profits as we're scaling the company. So I hope that's an encouraging story to entrepreneurs out there, because it was like, of the more than 7 years, the first 4 years were like a totally dark journey. And then the next 3 years were very uncertain upward journey. But then sort of, it's one of those things where like, it seems like an overnight success, but it's over 7 years in the making.
Yeah.
And so appearances can be deceiving. And I also wouldn't even though it's so funny, and this sort of sets us up for our talking points, which we prepped before the call.
Yep.
And this very strange title, somewhat dramatic title, I say with a sort of a grin and a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, "The Stone That the Investors Rejected," which is actually a quote from the Psalms, which is the stone that the builders rejected. The point is that like the thing that I wanted to happen, which was to raise a Series A from a tier 1 venture capital firm. Be careful what you wish for. If I had gotten what I wanted, I wouldn't have sovereignty now.
Yeah.
And it would have been the worst thing ever. It would have been the worst thing ever. Exactly. So I'm so glad, paradoxically, I'm so glad I failed. I'm so glad I didn't get what I wanted.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that the investors rejected the company. And they said, "Oh, it's a services company. Oh, it's not a tech company. Oh, it's not going to scale," all this stuff. I'm so glad. And I think this actually sets us up to have an interesting conversation, I think, for me, because it's something I'm fascinated by. Like, I'm not presenting what I'm going to share today are a series of hypotheses. I'm not presenting these as like a black belt who's figured it out and this is the truth. I'm presenting these are things I'm fascinated by, that I'm observing, and I'm literally in the experiment right now. But there is there's a relationship between theory and practice, right? As every entrepreneur knows. And there's a lot of theory that went into our company strategy, but obviously there's a lot of luck and chance and opportunity and practice that's sort of like chaos. And I'm fascinated by the relationship between those two. Go ahead.
Super cool. Well, no, I was just going to say, Francis, well, first of all, a really fascinating kind of journey that you've been on, not dissimilar to most, founders. And as you mentioned, and this is something, we talk about quite often on TechBeat, from the outside, the world believes that a founder's journey or the story of a company is all kind of glitz and glamour, and it's, like you said, just up and to the right all the time, right? And that isn't true. Most of us, fall flat on our face many, many times. And even throughout our journey, oftentimes we nail product market fit, we're scaling really nicely, and something shifts, right? The market shifts. That's happening right now. The market is shifting. And for some companies, that is, it's a fantastic force multiplier, right? Right now, as organizations are looking to figure out how to do more with less, how to automate more, how to outsource more, right? You and myself we're a tech-enabled services business as well, right? We are the natural type of providers that businesses go to. And so, there's these cycles throughout a company's journey and a founder's journey that oftentimes are just not visible from outside. Right. You were preaching to the choir. You don't have to tell me, like, I think that, and don't get me wrong, you're a technologist, I'm a technologist. This environment of where capital has flown, where it has flowed to in the last 20 or 25 years, or even, beyond that, has been specifically at primarily software, but also hardware, gadgetry and stuff like that. That's right. And that's created an ecosystem where there are problems that are not being solved, right? And many of those problems do require a human element. You can only do so much today, right? With automation, with AI, with behavioral analytics, whatever you want to call it, right? With software, it can't do everything for you. And so I still believe there's very much a place for services in a business ecosystem. and very high caliber, high level services. You're proving that point. In 6 months, growing 500 employees, right? Since the last time we chatted and prepped this segment, that's pretty impressive. And growing, last year $15 million in revenue. What you're doing, and then the way that you're. And by the way, if you had to raise capital now, you would be a very sexy target because
I know, so ironic,
right? All the investors right now, they're going away from cash burn, investments to profitable, profitable investments that can give them dividends, right? And that type of stuff. So, you probably have investors knocking at your door, but you don't need them at this point, which is, kudos to you and your team. And the fact that you're making everybody, owners and helping everybody win and giving everybody liquidity in the process, just, super cool, mindful, modern way to build, a tech business. And I like the fact that you're combining software and product with, services and humans. That's pretty dang cool. So let's kind of transition into some of the, the philosophies that have been very influential in your journey. I know you want to talk a little bit about books of Aikido, and some of the ideas, from there. So, I'm not super familiar with all this. I would love to learn from you, and I know the audience would as well. So fill us in a little bit about books of Aikido, and let's start diving into some of those ideas and how they can influence a founder's journey and the success of a venture.
Yeah, Earl, thank you so much for being open to have a kind of wacky and weird podcast conversation about business. Because most of we can have a conversation, for example, maybe another time, I'm happy to come back, about everything I've learned about finance in the process, right? So, we could talk about the difference between, actually we can do finance 101, talk about income statements, cash flows, balance sheets, equity value in a company versus enterprise value, and how to think about the company's capital stack, from senior debt to mezzanine debt to preferred equity classes to common, and to think about financial instruments, to think about alignment of incentives, to think about governance. Like, we can have what I would say the world expects from a business podcast. We can have a normal professional conversation. That would be fascinating.
Yeah, but that's boring. That's what everybody else does.
I've learned a lot. Exactly. Right. So exactly. That's what everyone else does. There's a great quote from Peter Thiel, who is somebody I admire and was the very first investor in my first company, which failed. So I lost him $50,000. And Peter says that there's the plan you tell the world. That's the plan on your website. That's the plan, in your app that, when people download it, that's the public plan that you would normally say in a podcast, or when you talk to the journalists or the press. And there's the plan you tell your team, like your whole company. Then there's the plan you tell your inner team, like your management team. There's the plan you tell yourself. That's the real plan. And all of us know that's true. It's kind of like Russian dolls, right? There's the outer doll, the inner doll, the inner doll. And so there's so we can talk about everything I've learned about corporate finance and corporate strategy. And it would be a fascinating conversation, but that would be the outer doll. The inner doll is more to do with like philosophy, or like the philosophy and theory, the philosophy of strategy, but also strategy is just one branch of philosophy. It's one form of wisdom. And so here are the three things that I came prepared to share. Here are the headers. I'm going to signpost here. 1, books as Aikido. Aikido is a Japanese martial art. So if there's any martial artists out of there, especially any Aikido practitioners, holler. The second is seeing the unseen. And I've got 3 subpoints here that are different versions of seeing the unseen. but seeing the unseen, gateless gates, escaping the labyrinth. We're going to talk about like these different myths, but they all have to do with the unseen, which after all, the company's called invisible. So I'm fascinated with the unseen. And the third is this thing of the stone that the investors rejected, which is really just about contrarian strategy, contrarian thinking. Okay, starting with number one, books as Aikido. I'll tell a story. In about a month ago, right before I left for Christmas and New Year's, I was invited to a friend's apartment, and I saw on her bookshelf this book, The Art of Peace by Morihei Ueshiba. And I was like, all I did is I recognized the symbol. That symbol there, I forget what it's called, but it's a symbol in Japanese art. And it's basically a circle. They'll make it with paint. And the artist will not proceed to do any other painting until they can create a perfect circle, because that actually demonstrates that you're in the right state of mind to paint. And I don't know if you've done any like creative activity that's outside of work.
I used to paint, and I'm a musician. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So two types. So you're both a visual artist and a musical artist. Okay, so you get it. You understand this concept. I think the secular word for it is flow.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
It's kind of a weird thing. Like, what is flow? But it's a real thing. Anyone who's done anything creative understands that, again, to use maybe to use modern psychobabble. There's the left side of the brain and the right side of the brain, right? There's the logical mind, which is like linear and sequential and predictable and textbook. And then there's the unconscious or subconscious mind, which is imaginary and intuitive. And so anyone who's seen the original Star Wars movie knows from the very first movie, Luke, turn off your targeting computer, use the Force. What is Obi-Wan talking about? He's talking about flow. Yeah. It's a thing. And Obi-Wan and Yoda and all these Jedi characters and the whole Jedi way was modeled off of, George Lucas wrote the Star Wars script, and he was inspired by Joseph Campbell, who was a mythologist in the 60s and 70s and helped import a lot of Eastern mythology, just like Alan Watts did, from the East to the Western consciousness. And what they did is they're like, whoa, this is like a Zen master or a Taoist sage or maybe an Indian yogi. Like that's what Yoda and Obi-Wan. It's sort of like a war. It's like Buddha meets the samurai or something. That's what Jedis are. But those people historically actually existed, because I've read the books. In the Chinese tradition, there's the I Ching, which is so old, 900 BC. They say it was written by dragons. Then there's the Tao Te Ching of Lao Tzu and the Zhuangzi of Chuang-Tzu, and there's the Analects of Confucius. In the Japanese tradition, there's the Book of the Samurai, Agakure. There's the Book of Five Rings, and there's The Art of Peace, which was I missing link for me. So when I saw this on the bookshelf, I was like, "Ooh, what's that?" Then there's the Indian tradition. Oh, I forgot. In the Chinese tradition, there's The Art of War by Sun Tzu. The Indian tradition, there's the Indian Art of War, the Arthashastra, the Vedas. There's all these different books. Now, the interesting thing about the way the ancients understood philosophy is they understood it as technology, because they understood that if you have an insight into the way the world works, you can act on that insight. You can build an empire based on that insight. What is the difference between an empire is a country, right? What is the difference between a country and a company? Two differences: land and armies. Other than that, companies have laws. They're called bylaws. Countries have laws. Companies have governance. It's called corporate governance. Countries have governance. Countries have revenue. It's called taxes. Companies have revenue. So actually, you can learn a lot about corporate strategy from reading books like this.
Some of my most brilliant advisors, like their go-to is The Art of War by Sun Tzu. Like that's their playbook, right? Yeah.
That's my playbook. Now, here's the interesting thing. It was once said that all of Western philosophy was footnotes in Plato. Alfred Whitehead said that. Now, I would say all of strategic literature is footnotes in Sun Tzu. I've read Machiavelli, I've read Clausewitz, I've read Luttwak, I've read many. I've read the most recent writing I could get my hands on from Chinese generals today, contemporary China. I am familiar with what you might call the strategic literature of history. Everything is footnotes in Sun Tzu. It's almost like I haven't read anything that I couldn't trace somehow to some verse in those 13 chapters. I've read The Art of War at least 18 times. I've studied it. I love The Art of War.
It's probably 16 more than I have.
Well, here's the thing. And the question is, why do you go back to it? It's like that person who's like obsessed with some movie. They watch the movie and over and over again. And like, if you watch it once, you've watched it a million times. Like, why do you do? So let me tell you something about The Art of War. My understanding of that book has completely changed over time. And this book, Aikido, is actually a key in understanding how my understanding has changed. Now, the thing about this book, The Art of Peace, is that I had already come to my inverted understanding of the art of war before reaching this book, but this book solidified that insight. So this was the insight. Sun Tzu is a pacifist. That's the joke. That's the joke. So for anybody who's skeptical out there, I'll make the argument briefly. And if you'd like to go back and forth on this, I invite you to email me. I'm easy to reach, francis@invisible.co. Francis, like the Pope, @invisible, like you can't see me, .co, not .com, like a company. All right. Sun Tzu says, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will not fear the result of 1,000 battles. Okay. Well, how do you know your enemy? You have to understand your enemy. How do you understand your enemy? You have to empathize with your enemy. How do you empathize with your enemy? You actually have to love your enemy. Wait a second. Is this Sun Tzu or is this Jesus? Like, what are we talking about? Sun Tzu says, the great warriors win without fighting.
Yep.
Thus, their victories bring them neither reputation for courage or cunning. Great strategy, you might say, is invisible. Why? Well, they see it coming from a long way. They see, there's going to be a war between this company and that company. There's going to be a war between this country and that country in 5 years. Unless I marry this prince to this princess. I send this trade delegation. I send this Christmas gift. I go over there and go on a hunting party with them. I arrange for this tower to be built at this key choke point. Then there will be no war. So the weird thing about that is that you don't get any credit for it because the war never happens.
Yeah.
Get it?
Yep.
And that's profitable. Now, here's an interesting thing, that this can be very profitable. Because you might think war is profitable, but as Sun Tzu understood, many people die, much money is spent. How much better is, wow, hang on a second. We used to have 2 families. Now we just have 1 family. Yeah. When you win, I win. We have aligned incentives. We're the same tribe. We used to have 2 tribes. Now we're 1 tribe. That's much more profitable.
Totally.
And so this idea,
a lot less waste,
harmonization,
a lot less waste in the process as well.
Yes. This idea of harmonization is key. And actually, Aikido, the Japanese martial arts. So this guy, Morihei Ueshiba, he was a soldier, an infantryman in the Russo-Japanese War. And this is, I think, early 20th century. He was born at the end of the 19th century. And then he was chasing like pirates and bandits in Mongolia. And then he was an elite instructor. Imagine like Mr. Miyagi for the Japanese elite military academies before World War II. There was a moment when an advanced sword fighter, an advanced swordsman, tried to kill him, and he was unarmed, and he defeated the guy. He had, at that moment, his first of 3 mystical experiences. He was already in his early 40s at the time. You got to imagine, this guy's seen it all. And he all of the martial arts techniques he'd learned, he suddenly realized that he was so good, he could win without injuring his opponent. He could win without attacking. He could win without getting angry. And he could dedicate himself and his students and build a tradition which uses the principles of martial arts for the purpose of harmonization, alignment of incentives. And he realized that it's almost like playing bigger and bigger games. So you start off by playing the game of like, can I win? And you win, and it's the hard way, and there's a ton of people dying and everybody's injured. And then you get better, and you're like, wow, I won, and I won effortlessly. I just, but you're dead. And then there's the like, I won, but nobody realized I won because the battle never happened. And then there's the I won, and because we're friends, right? And like that is really the highest. It's actually the most difficult game to play.
Yeah.
And that's what this book is about. And Aikido literally translates to the art of peace. Now, look, I sound like I'm preaching the gospel or something. This is a book I found in my friend's apartment a month ago. I did do martial arts growing up, a different one. So I actually have a black belt, but so there's a lot of the principles that I was taught sort of resonated.
Yeah.
So I had my own actual real life Mr. Miyagi. His name was Dragon Marjanovic. Thank goodness for that guy. Like, I'm so grateful for that guy. I'm out of touch with him. I need to like message him after this podcast.
Proper Eastern European name, huh?
Yeah, Serbian. He's Serbian.
Yeah.
But I guess, Earl, where I'm going with this whole Aikido thing is like, do you think, based on your experience as a fellow entrepreneur, that it is possible to get principles from a book like this that are theoretical principles and actually apply them when you're answering emails or doing Zoom calls or making financial decisions? Yes or no?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I think that you can learn from almost any source in life, right? Almost any person, no matter what your perspective of that person is or isn't, any book, any podcast, any content, right? There are lessons to be learned, and reflecting on those lessons, of course, right? And that's exactly why I produce this podcast, right? Is to give founders and leaders more tools, right? More considerations that they can draw upon throughout their day. You mentioned The Art of War, and really Sun Tzu's, kind of his, for me, the primary message of that book is that the greatest strategists, the greatest generals win wars by not winning battles, right? They don't, or many don't even go to battle. And you already, talked about this, but it's in fact, so when we do our yearly planning, we call it a pre-mortem, right? And I know that's not uncommon. We look at 12 months down the road, 36 months down the road, and we say, okay, well, here's the targets. Here's what we've planned for. What are our greatest risks, right? Are those risks internal? Are they external? Is it an enemy, right? Or is the enemy internal? And is it something, how do we then plan for? Is it we have to stand up that tower, right? Or is it we need to send that Christmas gift? We need to figure out some good diplomacy, whether that's internal or again external. And so I think that these ideas, and there's so much to learn from the ancient sages, in my opinion. Obviously, you have a deep-rooted appreciation for all of that. One of my greatest, friends and mentors and sages in my life is Brilliant Miller, and he studied Eastern studies, and he is a wealth of understanding and knowledge when it comes to ancient Eastern ideologies and philosophies and all that kind of stuff, right? And man, I think that there's just so much to draw from, and there's so much wisdom in thinking about. I saw, for example, I think it was on Kevin O'Leary's Twitter yesterday or something, and he said, basically, like, the founder that does not believe that business is war will find themselves losing the battle, right? And I
It's
don't
true.
believe that is, incorrect. But
Yeah,
does that mean that you have to be divisive? Does it mean that you
that's
have to
right.
be violent?
That's right.
Not necessarily, right? Now, okay, sometimes war escalates with competition and things like that, and
Hmm.
you have to go into head-to-head battle. But the greatest strategists are those that look down the road, that look behind
They
the
don't get
corners,
ambushed.
right?
They don't get ambushed.
Yeah,
They don't get
yeah,
ambushed. Yeah, they're not
absolutely.
surprised.
They
And
plan
so
for those eventualities beforehand, and
that's
they're
right.
ready. Yeah, yeah,
That's right. That's right.
yeah.
And I see that, I am looking at chat, and I know that we are live because Morgan Falco says, "Hey, Earl and Francis," and I'm saying, "Hey, Morgan."
Hey, Morgan,
And
thanks for joining.
Mark Webb's got a sense of humor because before I turned on video, he was like, "Will we be able to see Francis, or will he be invisible?" Um, and I love jokes like that because the name is actually supposed to be at least partly a joke and partly a hint at what the company does. And I think this actually sets us up for the other 2 points, which I want to hit before we end. So do you mind if I move on to point number
Let's
2?
go for it. Let's
Okay,
do it.
great. So the first point was books as Aikido. Theory is real. Theoretical unfair advantages are real. So you can think about insight or theory as a form of technology. It is an advantage. It's a performance advantage. It can be decisive in battle, right? In business. Theory is real. Theory is real. Theoretical unfair advantages are real. Theory got man to the moon. Theory invented the modern corporation. Theory invented financial instruments like insurance. Almost every great company has some sort of theoretical insight at its core.
Totally.
Books as Aikido. So invest in books. Now, I want to make an invitation to your audience, and that includes you, Morgan, and you, Mark, and you, Earl. I have surrounded myself with the wisest people I know, including Zohar Atkins, who I've asked to join our board. And we are doing a strategy course. We are calling Castaleo. And if you are interested in this strategy course, we're going to meet monthly on Zoom, and it's going to be a private class. And I have a private library, my own, it was my personal library. Now it's a company asset called Alexandria. And on Alexandria, I have The Art of Peace in Notion as a digital book where I have my notes on that. I also have The Art of War. I also have all the other books we're going to study. And so if you want access to those books, if you want access to those commentaries, if you want to be one of the students in this community, we welcome you. The price is free. The price is expensive though, because the price is you got to be a willing student, willing to learn and willing to apply. But as long as you are and you want to learn about this with us, we are all white belts here, but we are learning from the master, Master Sun Tzu, Master Clausewitz, Master Ueshiba. So okay, that's number 1. Number 2, seeing the unseen. I'm going to just read my notes here. 2A, seeing the unseen, reading, writing, thinking. 2B, gateless gates, communication, application, feedback. 2C, escaping the labyrinth, pivoting, iterating, following through, dialectical progression. What is all this about? So these are actually references to 3 different historical myths. The first, seeing the unseen, is a reference to an essay by a 19th century French senator, Frederick Bastiat, who wrote an essay called The Seen and the Unseen, in which the opening lines are, I've got it in front of me. A bad economist pursues a small present good, which will be followed by a great evil to come, while the true economist pursues a great good to come at the risk of a small present evil. Between a good and a bad economist, this constitutes the whole difference. The one takes account of the visible effect. The other takes account both of the effects which are seen and also those which it is necessary to foresee.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so isn't this true, Earl? Don't you wish there was an actual chessboard that could when I was a kid, I used to play strategy games like StarCraft or Age of Empires or Medieval Total War. And, the great thing about those strategy games is it's kind of like playing Risk, by the fire with your friends in an actual board game format, or Settlers of Catan. These strategy games are fun, partly because you can see the board, like chess. You can see the actual board. You can see the pieces moving around. But in business, it's actually very hard to see the pieces moving around. You have to have a 3D chessboard in your head at all times, and it needs to encompass many dimensions. There's the dimension of time. There's the dimension of cash. There's the dimension of equity. There's and sort of the cap stack in general. There's the dimension of the morale of your team. There's the dimension of the story that you're in, past, present, future. There's the dimension of the competition on the market. There's the dimension of your product. There's the dimension of distribution. And I'm sure I could think of more dimensions.
Sure. There's plenty.
And you don't even realize that you're doing it. You're like crunching all of that in your head all the time.
Yeah.
And I think the intro to this podcast was perfect because, gosh, I'm very aware of the chessboard. And I know that on Labor Day of last year, that was just 4 months ago, September, October, November, December, now we're January, so 4.5 months ago, we had 1,000 people and we celebrated it. And we have 1,500 already today. Now, let me just give you one example of what the benefit is of seeing the unseen. Imagine you have a special forces team, like a group of Navy SEALs. They're super tightly knit. These guys trust each other. They would go into battle together. There's like a team of 8. They're a squad. Okay, now they get introduced to some new person, the 9th person. What happens to that 9th person? That person either joins the team and operates at the same level and becomes similarly high trust and similarly elite, or that person gets rejected. They get cut from the team. Now, what happens if you have that same team of 8 and then you add 80 people to the team? It's no longer a special forces team. Mm-hmm. It moves to the average because the ratio of newbies to veterans has changed so dramatically that it's not the same old team. It's a completely new team, different average, lower average.
That's the challenge of scaling. Yes. Particularly when you scale people, right?
Yes. So I would be a fool. That's the technical term of art for it. I would be a fool if I didn't understand the erosive, dilutive, and potentially toxic, potentially high risk effect of averages and the law of large numbers and the physics of rapid change on my company culture, which I consider to be one of our greatest assets and a performance advantage. When we were small and growing less quickly, everyone had the same story, the same vision, the same principles, the same values. They understood the incentives. And it was like a family business because we had a lot of time to build trust and work together. Everyone was a veteran. Suddenly, the ratio of veterans to newbies is totally different. This is both an opportunity and a crisis. And there's the whole debate. JFK had a famous speech where JFK said, the Chinese symbol for opportunity is the same as crisis. And the debate about whether that's actually technically true, it's technically not, but actually it is fundamentally true in the Chinese consciousness, this understanding. Every opportunity is a crisis, every crisis is an opportunity. And so this is an opportunity crisis. I can see it because I'm able to see the invisible. Because I'm the CEO of Invisible, at least for now.
Yeah, as you kind of talk about these theories and these concepts, one of the things that stands out for me, Francis, is that as a younger entrepreneur, I started in my business, and I've had multiple different kind of ventures over my career, but I started my business at the age of 23. almost 24 years ago. So I've been doing it literally a little over half of my life. And when I was young and foolish, my pace was fast and furious. And I felt like that was, a strategic advantage in business. And I'm not saying that it's not, right?
Yeah, it's not you were not wrong. It
Yeah.
is actually an advantage. Yeah.
Yeah. Being first to market, or being the first to to innovate around certain services or products. And of course, there's speed can be a competitive advantage, right? But the older I get, particularly thinking about Eastern Eastern philosophies and Eastern history and these theories and concepts that you're talking about. As you get older, I think wisdom helps you understand that sometimes slowing down can be a competitive advantage also, right?
Yes.
Being adequately methodical enough to seek the invisible, right? To really step back and analyze deeply. Is it your enemy or is it your client, right? Is it your consumer, right? To analyze deeply and to empathize, as you've said, and then to think about the market, the shifting market. I mentioned earlier, this market is shifting, and a lot of people are having significant challenges figuring out how to adapt to it right now, right? I feel for them. We're all trying to figure out how to deal with the current economic situations, right? And the fact that there is a massive change happening right now. Is that change permanent? We don't know. My guess is that, particularly around the way that money flows into business and the economy, that some of those changes are probably not going to go back to the way they were, right? Mm-hmm. Capital has been pretty frivolous for the last decade or the last 15 or 20 years. I think that primarily investors, funds, LPs are stepping away from that type of activity. They're looking for more solid plays and founders who are more methodical and strategic about how they're building a business, right? And how they're going to win, not just today, but how they're going to win 5 years down the road. So, Francis, we're about out of time here.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Yeah, I know you've got things to get
I can try to wrap the last point.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fantastic.
So the other points here are gateless gates. There was a Zen book called The Gateless Gate. And what I got from this image is the idea of seeing opportunities that are a moment in time, a window of opportunity. Nobody else can see it. That's why it's gateless, but it's a gate. And you have to see those opportunities come very rarely. But for us, we had a gateless gate last month, for example, and the whole company walked through it because we saw something that was invisible. And this is now escaping the labyrinth. So as an entrepreneur, and I think almost all entrepreneurs who've been entrepreneurs for a long time understand this, you go through some period of time where you're wandering in the desert, you're wandering in the wilderness. It feels like you're stuck. It feels like you turn left and that didn't work. You turn right, that didn't work. You turn left and left and left and turn right and right, and you're lost. There is a logic to those labyrinths. And what you need is some people around you to be in it with you and read, write, think, debate, discuss, communicate, and be in a sort of dialectic between theory and practice together with them. And that will get you out of the labyrinth, and it will help you have the perseverance to keep going, because you actually need a lot of perseverance as an entrepreneur. I hope this was helpful to the audience. Again, I invite them to stay in touch.
It was fascinating. It was a lot of fun to be able to approach business from a little bit of a quirky angle, right? A different way to go back and look at this all from a different lens. I appreciate the way that you look at the world, Francis. I appreciate you being a guest here on TechBeat. It's been fantastic to spend this hour with you. We thank our live audience. This will be produced and then re-released as well in the coming weeks and months. So we encourage you to tune back in, learn from Francis's wisdom, take a look at what he and his team are doing at Invisible. It's quite extraordinary, and certainly reach out and connect with Francis. So thank you, everybody. We're gonna wrap. We wish you all a fantastic day and a happy new year to all of you.
Cheers.